Good evening, and welcome back to First Test, the first book in Protector of the Small by Tamora Pierce. This evening, Chapter 11, Spydren Hunt. After a hard morning's ride, they were given shelter from the light rain in the forest village's largest barn. Once the horses were tendered, everyone gathered round the Knight Commander to eat. At first, there was no sound but chewing. They were so hungry that even oatcakes, dried fruit, and water tasted good. Finally, Lord Raoul cleared his throat. "You young fellows may not know, but rain is good for this kind of work. We can track better in the mud, and with spydrens we need all the help we can get. We can't use dogs this time. Unless they're trained for it, dogs won't hunt them. They just turn their tail and run. Maybe they're smarter than we are." There was a quick chuckle from the listeners. "We have talismans to warn us of their presence, but the spydrens have spells to shield themselves. They're absolutely fearless, too. You first and second year pages, you'll carry staffs. If you're attacked, use the staff to hold the beast off and yell like mad. I mean it. No heroics." "Not against spydrens," commented a blunt-nosed Bazir. "They'll gag you in a web and hack your arms off before you know your sword is gone. Spydrens will stick to the trees if they're thick, as they are hereabouts," continued the Knight Commander. "That's what they prefer. They also go for bare rock. That's where they're hard to track. Now, will one of you local fellows give us a map?" A young man in hunter's greens and browns came forward. He used a stick to draw in the beaten earth of the floor, marking out streams, hills, and gorges. Everyone paid close attention. At last, Lord Raoul got to his feet. There was a lot of him to straighten from a crouch. Seen from close by, his shoulders and chest were as broad as the palace wall. "We hunt spydrens together," he said. "No going off alone because you think you see something. Each of you pairs with one of my men. Tell him if you see anything of interest. Now, arm up." "Horses?" asked one of the third-year pages. "You heard our guide. A lot of what's around is boggy. You don't want spydrens above you when your mount is wallowing. The horses stay here," replied Lord Raoul. "I'm just as glad," Kell told Peach Blossom, slipping him an apple. "I hate to risk you on something when I don't know what I'm about." Peach Blossom slobbered on her tunic, as if he bestowed a horse's blessing. Lord Raoul's second in command, Captain Flindon, paired up men and pages briskly. Kell was placed in the charge of the older Bazir soldier, the one who had mentioned his arms getting hacked off. He nodded to her. "I'm Cassim," he said, and pointed to her shoulders. "You have a feather rash." She blinked, confused, then realized what he was talking about. The sparrows were so light she forgot they perched on her. "Sorry, sir," she said meekly. "I don't have much control over them. Once we're moving, they'll go into the trees." To her surprise, the hard-faced man offered an open hand to her friends. He had grain in his palm. The grin on his face, as the small birds lit on his palm and helped themselves, made Kell smile in reply. When the grain was eaten and the sparrows returned to Kell, he was all business again. "Get your staff. What's your name?" The second in command had made his pairings by pointing to page and then soldier. "Kell, sir." "I am only Cassim, not sir. Get your staff." Kell obeyed. As she did, she noticed that the third and fourth year pages were armed with long spears, as were half the men of the own. The remaining men bore crossbows. All the soldiers, and the third and fourth year boys, carried swords as well. "I wish I had a glaive," Kell thought passionately. She was scared. If only Lord Wilden weren't so fixed in his ways. Once they were armed, Lord Raoul broke them into 3 groups, 10 soldiers in each. He led one group. Captain Flindon had the group including Kell and Cassim, while Lord Wilden took the third. One of the village men was placed with each group as a guide. Neil was in Lord Raoul's group. Kell was a little jealous. She would have liked to have watched the famed knight work at close range. They communicated by means of spelled pendants worn by each group leader. Cassim explained that the advantage of the pendants. The spydrens wouldn't realize they'd been seen, since they wouldn't hear a horn call. They would have less chance to summon help. The men of the King's Own also used a secret language of hand signals while they were in sight of one another. As their company moved into the surrounding forest, the rain continued to fall. It deadened the sound of their passage. That quiet was comforting to Kell. There was a difference between coming up behind grazing deer and approaching a prey that was clever, vicious, large, and fast. The thought of being stoned was not helpful just then. She remembered her mother facing the Scanran raiders. Had the lioness, in battle against giants, felt as if she wanted to crawl away to someplace safe? Of course not, and neither would Kell. She would be steadfast like her mother, like Alana the lioness. The hunters followed the signs left when the Spydrens had taken a cow, which was too big to be carried through the trees. When that trail ended at a stream, the three companies split up. Halts were called as each group found something that might lead them to their foes. All those clues to the Spydrens' whereabouts failed. The creatures knew they would be hunted. They were careful to hide their tracks. Now and then, someone would find abandoned webs. The men of the King's Own could judge from experience just how old the things were and how long it had been since Spydrens had used them. It was nervous work. All of them, even the veteran men, kept one eye on the trees. This part of the forest was old and untouched by humans. Some trees rose over 130 feet into the air. Kell saw how they would make a robe for creatures that could swing across gaps on web ropes. On the forest floor, the light was gray, weaving through the foliage to brush carpets of rotten brown leaves. While the tree cover held the worst of the rain off the hunters, it dripped dully, adding to the gloomy feel of the air. They heard no animals except Kell's sparrows, who chattered and talked amongst themselves. After yet another halt, as they waited to see if someone else had found anything useful, Cassim sat on a log and nodded for Kell to do the same. Half of the sparrows climbed on the man to see if he'd hidden more seed from them. The rest sat on or beside Kell, fluffing wet feathers and shaking themselves out. Crown hopped onto Kell's knee and eyed her, head tilted first to one side. Kell offered a finger. When Crown hopped on, she raised the bird before her face. "I wish I were Dane," she said very quietly. "I'd ask if you could flit about and find these Spydrens. You'd be wonderful spies." "We shall find them. We must," Cassim assured her. When Kell raised her eyebrows in question, he explained. "Often they bite off a victim's limb, then slap web on it to keep them from dying of blood loss. The woman they took may yet live." Kell felt her stomach roll. "I really wish we could find them then," she said hotly, "and sooner rather than later. They are monsters." Captain Flindon waved them to their feet. Word had come through, another dead end. As Kell stood, Crown hopped to the log and began to chatter. When she stopped, the entire flock sped off. Kell shrugged and resettled her grip on her staff. They searched through boggy ground that threatened to yank their boots from their feet, then uphill until they rejoined Lord Raoul and Lord Wilden's groups. As the men and pages relaxed, the officers went apart to confer. Kell was having a drink from her water bottle when the sparrows returned, twittering and shrieking. They whirled around her like a small cyclone. Neil, who'd come over to talk with her, covered his ears with muddy hands. "Must they be so shrill?" he demanded. Crown and a male sparrow hovered before Kell's face. They both clutched a long stick. When Kell held out her hands, the sparrows dropped their burden. Holding up the stick, Kell noticed a fat, gray-green worm was dangling from the end. Or was it a worm? She looked closer. She'd seen this gray-green stuff before. "Cassim?" He snatched the twig from her hands. "My lord!" he called. Grabbing Kell's shoulder, Cassim towed her over to Lord Raoul, Lord Wilden, and Captain Flindon. Kell's sparrows trailed her like a flying scarf, with Neil close behind them. Crown perched on the girl's shoulder and wiped her beak on Kell's ear. Cassim gave the twig to Lord Raoul. The big man raised his eyebrows and touched the web. It clung so well that he had to use his belt knife to scrape it off his skin. "This is fresh," he commented, letting Lord Wilden have a look at it. "Where did you find this?" Cassim pointed to Kell, who gulped. "My lord," she began. "Call him sir. He prefers it," murmured Cassim. "Sir," Kell said, "my sparrows brought it to me." "Pets?" asked Lord Raoul, raising his brows. "We weren't allowed them in my day." "They aren't pets exactly," Kell explained nervously, keeping an eye on Lord Wilden. "They live in the courtyard outside my room, and I feed them, and they seem to like me. And Neil of Queenscope, he says palace animals are so much cleverer since Dane came there." Lord Wilden's mouth twisted, and Kell shut up. "Too bad they can't lead us to the Spydrens," Lord Raoul remarked with a sigh. "Any idea on how far they might have flown before they encountered this?" Kell shook her head. She had an idea, though she knew Lord Wilden would not want to hear it. She hesitated, then decided she had nothing to lose. "My Lord Knight Commander," she began. Cassim nudged her. Sir, Kel corrected herself, I think they could lead us to the Spydrins. Are you a wild mage, too? Asked the big knight. You can speak with them? No, Kel admitted, but I think they understand more than you'd guess. They know who's planting a dirty trick on Kel and who isn't, Neil said abruptly. They know who's her friend and who isn't. Sir, if Kel thinks they might lead us, maybe we should listen. Kel looked around, startled. Phaleron had drawn closer, while Sir Raoul had examined the Spydrin's web. She's smart about a lot of things, added Merrick, standing close to Neil. Whatever some people say. Neil and Phaleron nodded agreement, when Lord Raoul looked at each of them. Crown rose from her shoulder, fluttering, and called to the others. They flew with her to the clearing's edge and perched on a tree. Crown then flew back to Kel, chattering, turned, and rejoined her flock. Lord Raoul scratched his head. This is what I've come to, he said mournfully, following little birdies. He singled out first a local guide, then 10 pages and soldiers, including Cassim and Joran. To his second he said, I'll take 'em, Flindon. You might want to break out blaze bomb and torches. He glanced at the sky. It'll be dark soon. Feed everyone, and save some for us. All right, youngster, he told Kel. They know you best, and your friends seem to think you've had a head on your shoulders. Let's see how quiet you can lead. You're on point. But, sir, she argued, Wilden would never approve. They're your birds, Sir Raoul told her. Do you think you can lead us? If you're not sure, we'll just keep fumbling around. Crown cheeped impatiently at Kel. The girl took a deep breath. Yes, sir, I think they can lead us. Then let's go, ordered Sir Raoul. Kel looked up into the big man's slow black eyes and sighed. Resettling her grip on her staff, she walked over to the sparrow's tree. They took off, leading her toward a trail through a cut in 2 rocks. She advanced as quietly as she knew how, keeping an eye for brush and pebbles underfoot. She was on her mettle with 7 men and 3 of the pages following. Even if I can't come back, she thought fiercely, I'll have done this much. I'll have led a Spydrin hunting party. The sparrows landed within view on top of a flat rock. As soon as she drew even with them, they flew again, taking care to remain in sight. There was no 2 ways around it. They knew where they were going, and they wanted her to follow. The humans climbed up through what seemed to be an endless tumble of stone until the birds checked at the top of the rise and came speeding back to Kel. They immediately landed on every perch on her body might offer, feathers raised, quivering. Who needs a wild mage when what they're saying is as plain as heralds that they've seen the monsters? Lord Raoul's voice was almost soundless, murmur in her ear. She hadn't even heard the big knight come up beside her. He motioned her to stay put, got low to the ground, and inched his way to the pile of boulders that formed the crest. 3 of them formed a triangle of space. He unclipped a spyglass from his belt, opened it, and thrust it into the triangle. After a few minutes he closed the glass and worked his way down from his vantage point. With hand signals he urged their party to fall back. At last he signaled a halt. The men and pages drew close to hear what he'd seen. He rubbed a hand across his mouth for a moment and then said, There may be more in a cave I saw, but, rough count, I make it about 20 of the things. I'm guessing most are here now that the dark's come on, and we didn't spot any out raiding today. They've layered up in a pocket valley on the far side of that rise. There's a waterfall at the northwest end. It forms a stream that runs out in 2 branches, east and southeast. It leaves about 30 feet of open ground in front of that cave. Then there's trees and more rock on the north and northeast sides of the valley. The cave's part of that rock. He looked at the local guide. It's Ladies' Fall, sir, the man told him. The gentry picnic there sometimes. The cave's big enough that young'uns feel bold exploring it, but it's no warren. They can be bottled up in there. What of the valley itself? Are there other approaches than the one we just took? He asked Cassim. There's a rock stair carved by the fall, said their guide. We can take a woodcutter's road to reach it without entering the valley. Have they put webs on the rocks around the fall? Lord Raoul shook his head. Then maybe they don't know about the stair. It's slippery and it's well hid. And there's a deer trail across the fork in the stream. It runs past where you left your soldiers, my lord. Lord Raoul nodded. Let's get them. Time to go to work. 2 mages of the Own set up magical shields that would hide them from Spydrin detection as long as everyone stayed in one spot. Once that was done, the leaders of the force worked out their attack. As they did, Kell looked at the map Lord Raoul had drawn in the mud. The Spydrens had picked their camp well. A broad, deep stream lay across the front of their cave, which was set in rocky hills and thick woods. The Knight Commander drew lines to show where the creatures had spun webs and stretched them across the gaps between trees. Some of the soldiers had sacks of a powder that would melt the Spydren webs. Once the element of secrecy was lost, the humans could also light torches to defend themselves from attacks and from the webs. Lord Raoul's scouting party ate as the plans were laid. Kell's bread tasted like wood, the thick, cold slices of ham like greasy lead. After Hakun told them the Yomani proverb, "Those who do not eat before battle are eaten by battle," Kell made herself chew and swallow her food. She could not face more than 2 bites of cheese, and gave her share to Seaver. "I think I'm going to faint," Neil muttered in her ear. "Me too," she replied. They smiled weakly at one another. Once again the party was split up, one group under Lord Raoul, the other under Lord Wilden. The 2 lords divided their commands into 3 ranks. The first was made up of spearmen and mages, the second of bowmen and spearmen, the third of torchbearers and lookouts. Kell, Neil, and the other first and second year pages were in the 3rd rank, with one exception. Esmond was placed in the 2nd rank because he could cast bright light. "He'll see more of the fighting," grumbled Merrick. Cassim overheard. "Depend on it, boy. You will see more than you want." Lord Raoul explained how each rank would use weapons, magic, and the torches. Once everyone understood precisely how he wanted things done, he said, "My group will enter the valley from this end, along this branch of the stream." Lord Raoul nodded to the rushing water that ran by the spot where they had gathered. "Lord Wilden's group will come down that rock stair by the fall and hit them from the opposite side. We meet and push them back on that cave. You lads, we're taking a chance on you, but your training master says you're all up to it." "Even me?" Kell wondered. "I listen when Lord Wilden speaks, so don't prove him wrong," finished Lord Raoul. "The 3rd rank, to me," Wilden said coolly. As the pages and the 2 men who'd been assigned to help them gathered around, he said quietly, "The torches in your charge are important, but more important still is your task as lookouts. Your eyes must not be in front toward the fighting, but toward the back. Keep an eye on the trees, the stream, and the open ground. If Spydrens are outside this valley when we strike, they may attack from behind and roll us up. Do not let that happen. If you see movement, yell, 'At the rear!' The bowmen will listen for it and cover you." He looked at them all for a moment, then continued, "The first 2 ranks will go forward, pressing the Spydrens into the cave. You stay put. We need you spread out to give you the best chance to see any surprises." He paused and said, "What is the warning call?" "At the rear!" they chorused. "Very well." He looked at each of them, then put his palms together. The pages did the same. "Lord Mithras, grant us victory. If you are merciful, grant it not too high a price. So mote it be." "So mote it be," murmured the pages. "Take a spear, all of you," he ordered. "I don't care what else you're holding. If a Spydren comes at you, drop it and get that spear up." When he went to speak to Lord Raoul, Neil murmured to Kell, "Trust a stump to have a cheerful outlook. Not too high a price, indeed." Kell shook her head at him. "You think we'll get out of this without a scratch?" "No, but he doesn't have to put the idea in people's heads." The men were signaling for quiet. The mages were about to remove the wards that kept them hidden. They all gathered weapons and supplies and separated into their groups. "Gods of mountains and the rivers," Kell thought in Yamani, "please don't let me bring dishonor to my teachers and my family." She collected a spear. The local guide led them to the woodcutter's road and onto the waterfall stair. It was cut deep and narrow in the rock beside the fall, which meant Kell never had to look down from a height, only to the next few steps. One thing helped on that slippery descent beside the roaring river: the full moon lit the way. Kell thanked the goddess, whose lamp the moon was, when she nearly stepped on a section of rock polished like glass by the water's passage. The light showed her the danger just in time. The bottom of the stair was screened by a tall stand of lilacs. The leafy branches hid them from view in the valley. As they waited, Kell saw Lord Wilden murmur into the spelled pendant he wore. He raised a hand. The men and older pages of the 1st rank prepared themselves. Lord Wilden's arm dropped, and he led the first wave of their attacking party forward. They ran in silence to fall on the Spydrens that lazed around the fires by the stream. Something bright exploded high overhead. a ball of the sticky black paste called blaze bomb, set off by a human mage. That was the signal for the second group of warriors, archers and spearmen, to run onto the open ground. Behind them came the third rank. All of them, including Neil and Kell, had bundles of torches on their backs and a torch in their free hands. As they ran, they held their torches out to their sides. When Spydrins began to charge from the cave, human mages called them into power. The torches, held out by the pages, burst into flame. The two groups of humans came together once more and lined up with their backs to the stream. Now there were human shouts as counterpoint to the shrilling of the Spydrins. The boom and crack of magic and the clang of metal against metal added to the racket. A loop of web shot high in the air, glowing yellow-green as Spydrin webs did at night. Kell saw lattices of the gleaming stuff, potential traps to her left and to her right. She watched the flying ropes of web until Neil shouted in her ear, "We're lookouts, remember?" "Oops," Kell said. Following her orders, she thrust her bundle of unlit torches into the ground end first, so those in the second rank could grab them at need. She lit them all from the torch she carried, then passed that torch to the soldier in the second rank who reached for it. Turning her back on the torches and the fight, Cal settled her spear in her grip and began to watch the gold-splotched darkness in front of her. The night blindness that came from looking at burning torches took a few moments to fade. Once it did, she saw the ground and trees on the other side of the water clearly. Glancing to her side, she noticed that Seaver watched the fight, not the water or the trees. She nudged him with a booted foot. "Seaver!" He looked at her. "We're sentries," she reminded him. He looked around, gulped, and nodded. Quickly he placed his load of torches and nudged his neighbor Quindon. He too had forgotten his orders. Kell had to fight the urge to turn and see how the battle went. Every time her curiosity was about to win, she envisioned the Spydrin that ate kittens and kept her eyes where they belonged. From the shouts of the fighters, she knew the first two ranks were pressing the Spydrins back toward their cave. The creatures fought desperately, many armed with swords or axes and powerful forelegs. There would be no surrender. This was a fight to the death. Kell scanned light-dappled water and shadowed trees. The stream shifted, then bulged. A Spydrin leapt from the water onto the stream's bank. It carried twin axes. "At!" she squeaked, her throat bone dry. 4 more Spydrins climbed onto land in the wake of the first. Kell found her voice and shouted, "At the rear! At the rear!" Seaver turned. He'd been watching the fight again. He gasped when he saw the leading Spydrin just yards away. His face hardened and he cried, "You killed my father!" He charged the enemy. The Spydrin reared on its hind legs to clear its spinneret. Kell knew that move. She had seen it at Mindolin. "Neil! Merrick!" she cried to the boys on either side of her and Seaver. She reached with her spear to knock Seaver's feet out from under him. He went sprawling as a loop of web lashed at the spot where he'd been. Glancing to Merrick's far side, Kell shouted, "Quindon, all of you! 3 steps forward!" She ran up beside Seaver. The leading Spydrin dragged back its web, letting it catch on the fallen boy. Kell sensed Neil and Merrick come forward as she did, their spears pointed at the foe. Quindon, for all he didn't like her, was just half a step behind. He and Merrick screamed, "At the rear!" when they saw 5 Spydrins were coming at them. The sight of not 1 page but 4 in a steady line, all armed with spears, made the Spydrins hesitate. Seaver wept in rage, and he used his belt knife to hack at the web that clung to him. He didn't see 5 crossbow bolts sink into the Spydrin that had thrown it. The Spydrin lurched back and reared again, trying to shoot more web at the short line of pages. The tilt of the ground betrayed it, making it tumble back into the stream. Seaver cut himself free just when the Spydrin's web could have dragged him in after its spinner. "On your feet!" Kell urged him, kicking his spear closer to him. "Come on!" Seaver grabbed the spear he dropped and lurched to his feet as the other 4 Spydrins charged the page's line. Kell watched the closest, her pulse hammering in her ears. It came at her with a raised axe in each foreclaw, screeching in fury. Kell promptly forgot her staff lessons. Holding the spear as she would her glaive, she cut with it in a sidelong arc. The weapon's slim razor point sliced through the Spydrin's chest and arm, releasing a spray of dark blood. Kell reversed the spear and cut back, dragging the blade down. It bit into the Spydrin at the neck and stuck there as crossbow bolts riddled the immortal. Kell had to let the spear go. She looked to either side to see how her friends did. 3 attackers lay dead, crossbow bolts sticking from their hides like quills in a hedgehog. 1 had dragged Quindon's spear from his hand. Merrick had cut off the foreleg of another Spydrin before the archers killed it. One Spydron had fallen just a foot away from Neil, its curved sword touching his boot. Neil's spear transfixed the thing, entering the chest and emerging through its back. "Neil!" breathed Kell, impressed. "Pinned it like a beetle on a card." "I'm going to be sick," croaked Neil, and was. "Back into line!" roared Lord Wilden from the far end of their row. "Get torches if your spears are gone!" Kell, Neil, Seaver, Merrick, and Quindon obeyed. When the fight was nearly over, the soldiers found they had one more job. Inside the cave was a clutch of more than 30 young, feeding on the body of the village woman. None were taller than 18 inches, but when they saw humans they rushed to the attack. The men and pages kept them back with their swords until they could roll a barrel of blaze bomb into the nest. A mage whispered, and the blaze bomb roared into flames. Hearing the young shriek as they burned, Kell found it was her turn to vomit. 2 days later, they returned to the palace, a quiet and weary group. They had packing to do, and one final supper in the mess hall. To the page's surprise, they were joined by the Shang warriors and the men of the King's Own who had been with them on the hunt. They all stood by their seats, wondering why Lord Wilden had not said the prayer and allowed them to sit. The answer came when the king arrived. As he'd done on the first day of classes, he said nothing before they ate. He dined with Lord Wilden, Lord Raoul, the two Shangs, and Captain Flindon at Lord Wilden's table. No pages were asked to wait on them. Servants performed that task, while the pages and the men of the Own relaxed over their food. There was a treat, pies made from the first berry harvest of the summer. Only when they could eat no more did the king rise to stand at the lectern. "You've had your time of fire," he told the pages quietly. "Lord Wilden reports that you all did well." Did he? Kell wondered tiredly. Or did he say the boys did well? The king went on. "I am glad not to have to tell your parents you will not be coming home to help with the harvest." Soft chuckles passed around the room. King Jonathan waited for them to fade. "You and these warriors did important work, as bloody, dangerous, and frightening as it was. It is the kind of work knights must do in our modern age. You may get thanks only from me, but I hope you know the value of what you did. Go home now. Laze in the sun and steal apples. Try not to get too out of practice. The realm needs your arms as strong, your hearts as steady as when you faced those Spydrons." He nodded to them and left so quickly that they were still trying to rise as the door closed behind him. Lord Wilden came to the lectern. "I know you all wish to pack. Get to it. Kelladry of Mindolin, report to my office at the next bell." "I'm sorry," whispered Merrick. He got up awkwardly and fled the room. "You saved my life," Seaver added, his voice cracking. He hugged her one-armed around the head as if he were one of the boys, and followed Merrick out. When none of her other friends moved, Kell forced herself to rise and pick up her tray. "Have a good summer," she whispered, and took her things to the servants for the last time. She'd thought she'd resigned herself to being packed off for good. From the way her food turned to a lump in her belly as she trudged back to her room, she hadn't done it as well as she thought. There was a letter from her mother on her bed. With all the preparation needed for Kell's older sisters and Dahlia and Arana to be presented when the court social season began that fall, her parents had come to stay at their Choristown house for the summer. They looked forward to seeing Kell there. As Kell read the letter, her gloom deepened. She could not stay in town with her parents and sisters. She might encounter people that she knew from the palace. How could she live in the city, watching knights come and go, knowing she would never be one of them? "I'll ask them to send me home to Anders at Mindolin," she thought sadly. "They'll understand." It was a good idea, but the thought of the "I told you so's" that her sisters-in-law would hurl at her made her cringe. Her sparrows were nowhere to be seen as she entered her room. They had rejoined the flockmates who had stayed behind, whirling around the courtyard to celebrate their return. Now they chattered as they perched in the small tree in the courtyard. "I'll miss you," whispered Kell. She would ask Dane if she could still take Peach Blossom. With 2 daughters to present at court, her parents would be hard-pressed to also buy a war-horse. Thinking of the birds and Peach Blossom, she felt her eyes sting with tears. "I am not going To let Lord Wilden see I've been crying, Kell told herself. Fetching her glaive, she did a pattern dance to pass the time. The dreaded bell finally rang. Kell put her glaive down, combed her hair, and washed her face. Then she walked to Lord Wilden's office, feeling like a prisoner on the long walk to the gallows. The servingman bowed to Kell, then opened the door and announced her. She entered the office, listening to the door as it closed at her back. Lord Wilden stood with his back to her, staring through a window that opened onto a palace rose garden. Was he looking at flowers, she wondered, or maybe at the nobles who walked there as the skies grew dark? You sent for me, my lord, she said. Lord Wilden sighed and turned. Sit down, girl. Kell hesitated, then sat. Wilden absently massaged his right arm. I want you to listen to me. I speak to you as I would to my daughters. Kell blinked at him, startled. She supposed she knew that Lord Wilden had a wife and family, but she had forgotten it. It was hard to imagine him with any life other than that of training master to the pages and squires. Now that you have made your point, consider the future. Soon your body will change. The things that you will want from life as a maiden will change. Pursue the course you have, and you might be crippled by an accident. He looked at his right arm and smiled crookedly. What if you fall in love? What if you come to grief, or cause others to do so, because your thoughts are on your heart and not combat? This year was the easiest. You think so? She asked him silently. It wasn't your year, was it? She opened her mouth to reply. Not now, he said, raising his hand. Do not answer me now. Go home and think about it. He sighed. You are dismissed. She had to hear him say it. I can't come back then. The training master shook his head wearily. Should you desire to return at the end of September, you may do so. I hope that you will choose otherwise. Now Kell was really confused. She stood, her knees trembling. I can come back in the fall? Lord Wilden nodded. That is what I said. You may return. Good night, Kelladry. Good night, Lord Wilden. Outside his office, she felt a wave of giddiness sweep over her. She turned and pressed her face against the cool stones of the wall. Back in her room, she reread her mother's letter. Now she was glad the family would be in town. She could visit Peach Blossom, ride him, maybe practice what she'd learned so as to be in shape for autumn. She threw down the letter and ran into the hall, trembling with excitement. Kneel! She yelled. Rold, Seaver, Merrick, I can stay! I can stay! 2 weeks after moving to her parents' townhouse, Kell returned there for an afternoon spent with Peach Blossom. To her surprise, her mother met her as she came in. Elaine looked at her, then shook her head. I'm still shocked by how much you grew this year. You'd think I'd be used to it by now. How much was it? 3 inches? Kell nodded. I'm 5 feet 3 inches tall now, she said proudly. Another inch and I'll catch up with Papa. He'll be delighted, poor man, said her mother teasingly. I came to tell you that a crate arrived while you were out. There's no sign who it's from. I had a footman pry off the lid, but no one has touched it. Kell ran up to her room. A large crate filled with heaps of wood shavings waited there for her. Kell worked her way through the shavings until her fingers bumped against something large wrapped in cloth. Well? asked Elaine. Kell turned. Both her parents stood in the doorway looking as puzzled as she felt. I think I need help getting it out, she said. Piers came over. Between them, he and Kell wrestled a bulky, heavy parcel wrapped in oiled cloth out of the crate. The minute Kell saw its rough shape, she guessed what it was. Her heart drummed in her chest. Using her belt knife, she cut away the cords that held the cloth around the thing. It was a saddle. Not just any saddle, but a tilting saddle made high in the front and back. It was dark wood with brown leather fittings, but the workmanship was beautiful, the materials the finest that could be had. She ran her fingers over the padding, feeling how soft it was. "And there's no message of any kind?" demanded Elaine. "It's such an expensive gift. Not a note? Has anyone mentioned sending you a present?" As she and her father searched for a note, Kell told them about her belt knife and the bruise balm. When the crate produced nothing but wood shavings, she decided to take one more look at the saddle itself. This time she did it with her fingers, exploring each bump and crevice. When she pressed a stud set on the top rim, squarely at the center, she heard a click. A section of the wooden rim flipped up. The girl saw a bit of white parchment inside and drew it out with 2 fingers. On it was written, "Goddess bless Lady Page." And there you are. That is First Test, the first book of Protector of the Small. I guess we now have to decide what we will do next.